It's so wonderful to see everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this celebration of my father's life. I'm Sulome Anderson. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Lou Boccardi, who was the former president and CEO of the Associated Press, and a great, great friend of our family, and who played an integral part in my father's release from captivity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sulome. As you've just been told, my name is Lou Boccardi, and I am the retired executive editor, and after that, president of the Associated Press. I could put that bit of biography in a different way. I'm the guy who sent Terry Anderson to Beirut. I don't think he held it against me, but one can never be sure. I had been president of AP for 2.5 months. I was in a hotel in Disney World, middle of the night, sleeping, when the phone rang. A voice from the cable desk in New York at 50 Rock said simply, "Terry Anderson has been kidnapped." I was, of course, stunned, chagrined, and after dealing with him for a few minutes, in which he told me there was a witness, and that witness is going to be at this microphone a little bit later this evening, I sat on the bed, shaking my head at the way things unfold sometimes. I had been in Cairo a few days before with a meeting of our Middle Eastern bureau chiefs. Terry was there, of course, as our chief Middle East correspondent. And I told Terry, I want you to come home now. And he wasn't quite, I didn't hear yes. And I said, I'm not ordering you to get on the plane with me when I leave, but it's time for you to leave. They're taking Americans like you. You know, they were reaching into a certain group, if I can call it that. Come home. And Terry said, Lou, they know me, they know the AP, they'll leave me alone. So I flew out of Cairo and left him there. That Saturday night, this call came that he had been taken. And that capture, if I can call it that, began an extraordinary time of suffering for him, for his loved ones who were here, Madeleine, Sulome, and Gabrielle, and indeed for all of the AP, which shared, as best one could, the agony he was going through. That boss to correspondent conversation came back to my mind 6.5 years later on a cold German morning at an airport, an Air Force base in Germany. I stood at the bottom of the ramp leading down from the plane, which had flown Terry to freedom from his last stop in Damascus. He came down, and we embraced each other, and his first words to me were, "I'm sorry, boss." And I thought back to the conversation in which he said, "They'll be fine. I'll be fine, boss." From that point forward, Terry Anderson was never far from my mind, and from the minds of AP people all over the world. Those words told me that whatever damage was inflicted by his captivity, and I guess there was some, Terry was back with his sense of humor and his persona. The AP headquarters team had made a plan, and of course, you all know a plan made at headquarters has got to be right. We had made a plan to have Terry go from, as soon as we got a little beyond the homecoming, to the care of a couple of people we had hired who were experienced. I guess they were psychiatrists, they were at least counselors, and that we hired them to be with Terry somewhere in the Alps. I don't remember where, somewhere in the Alps, to see to his reentry. And we explained to Terry that that's what's next. Given the dignity of this evening, I can't quite repeat what he said. I'll give you the broad outline, and you can fill in what's missing. He said more or less, I haven't been in warm sunshine for 6.5 years, and you want me to go to the Alps? You gotta be out of your mind. And he elaborated mind a little bit. So Plan B was instantly formulated, and Terry and his family went to the Caribbean sun. To go back to the time of his capture, we helped Madeleine and the soon-to-arrive Sulome to resettle in Nicosia. And pivotal to that effort was our bureau chief in Nicosia, a man named Nick Luddington, and his wife, Cassandra. Cass and Maddie became something like sisters. They were immensely helpful to us in that very difficult moment. Now, there are a lot of other AP people who deserve mention here, and I can't obviously name them all. We'll be here till tomorrow. But I should mention a few. Of course, his sister Peggy, a relentless voice calling for the his release, and for the release of all the hostages. And the AP people here will recognize the name of Larry Heinzeling, who was a high-powered, a high-level AP international executive. And I assigned Larry full-time to the Anderson case. And he traveled the world in pursuit of some way we could find to end Terry's ordeal. To tell you the truth, even tonight, I can't say that I ever think we got close, but we were out and trying throughout that time. Larry traveled the world, literally. He'd call me from wherever he was, and I could almost, after a few months of it, a few years of it, tell by the sound of his voice whether he had anything good to report. He'd say, Lou, Larry, and you think there's only one way to say that. No, there are a few ways to say that. And I could tell by the way he said it that it was another dry run. There were AP people all over the world and all over this country who were so generous in their care and concern for Terry. I'll mention only one, a newsman in Los Angeles, who was just without peer in terms of the way he cared for and kept alive the notion of Terry and our concern for him. His name was Jeff Wilson, and there were so many, many more. Terry was not forgotten anywhere in the world, least of all, I can't say in this building because we weren't here then, but least of all in the AP headquarters building. Nobody came home on home leave to see me as president without starting the conversation. What do we know about Terry? Unfortunately, there was often not a lot I could say. But when Terry came back, we knew that his sense of humor survived. I was reminded of that just a few days ago when I mentioned to my son Mark that this event was taking place tonight, and Mark recalled the time that we had the Andersons to our home, in Westchester for Sunday dinner immediately after he came back. And my wife Joan prepared a platter of chocolate chip cookies, and she brought them out to the dining room table, and Terry took one and rather showily turned it around and said, "You know, I haven't seen one of these in a long time." We thought it was funny then. The word courage comes to mind insistently when we talk about Terry Anderson. And I'm going to close with words about courage from Nelson Mandela, who spent more than 20 years in a cell on Robben Island off the coast of South Africa, a cell in which I've sat. And as I sat there, I thought of Terry and what he was going through. Speaking of his own captivity and the ultimately successful fight against apartheid, Mandela said this about courage. He said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but triumph over fear. The brave man is not he who does not fear, but he who conquers his fear." By that standard tonight, we honor the painful yet inspiring journey of a very brave man. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. So our next speaker is, our next two speakers are members of a strange fraternity and a very, like family to my family. John McCarthy, British journalist who was held with my father. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Sulome, and thank you to you, Gabrielle and Madeleine, for inviting me to be here with Brian tonight to speak about our dear hostage friend, Terry. It was very moving to hear from Lou just now already. And, you know, I've spoken about that captive hostage experience many times to all sorts of audiences over all the years since we eventually came home in 1991. But there's never been an event like this, of course, when one's remembering one of us. And so forgive me if I get a bit wonky at times talking about Terry. It's amazing because he's, you know, was such a vital part of those years of our ability to survive together, such an extraordinary, vibrant character. And yet, to be honest, in the spring and summer of 1986, the months after I was kidnapped and Brian was kidnapped, and we were then sharing a cell, the two of us, the last person in the world, really, that we wanted to meet was Terry Anderson. And the reason being that was that we knew that Terry and another American, who you'll remember, Tom Sutherland, and other Americans were being held by militants who were always referred to on the news wire services as the shadowy Islamic group, Islamic Jihad. So we knew we didn't want to be with these guys because, you know, you could be held for over a year or more. And so one day we would move from one prison to another, Brian and I, and found ourselves looking across a cell block, and there we saw, looking out of a grill, a metal grill at the top of this door, two very pale, bearded, shadowy faces. And they were, and we recognized their faces from the newspapers and the television, Anderson and Sutherland. So our hearts sank. I thought, my God, we're in with the group that we absolutely don't want to. And that was a shocking realization for us to think, wow, you know, we thought maybe the Irishman and the Brit, we might be treated differently or be in for a different experience and be going home early, but now we knew we could be in for a very long run indeed. Initially, we commuted across that cell block just with sort of really simple hand signals, and then Terry one day Anderson waved a bit of paper and a pen at us and indicated that he was going to leave these in the little bathroom that we all used when the guards took us there each morning, one by one. And he did, and so he left them. Thank you. And so he did, and that way we communicated for a while. Then we ran out of paper, and the guards wouldn't give Terry any more. And then Brian, who's extremely intelligent and also creative character, just like Terry, came up with the idea of using the silver foil from cigarette packets. We all smoked in those days. And when using a dead match, you could write on the foil and write a message. Real sort of POW stuff. It was cool. And then once you read the message, you could smooth out the letters and write another one. So we communicated like that. And then Anderson one day wrote on the bit of foil, "Today I'm going to start teaching you the alphabet for the deaf and dumb sign language." So he did that, and he taught us A, B, C, however it worked, a crude sort of way of communicating. But it meant we could talk across the cell block, me and Brian to Tom and Terry, and subsequently also to Frank Reed, another American hostage. So we were communicating live. At that point, one soon realized that Anderson's brain tended to work at least 1.5 times faster than anybody else's, because the language, the way he was spelling out using those deaf and dumb letters, and I was desperately trying to keep up with them. And then I realized that when I was replying, he was sort of almost saying, "Come on, yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Get a." So it was quite challenging, but it was wonderful. But it was I think another 18 months before, after a couple of moves, we were in other locations, Brian and I. But we knew that Anderson and Sutherland and probably Frank Reed were in those places, but we could never see them, never speak to them or communicate with them. And then we were moved, and late one night, inevitably, we arrived in a new place, and we were taken in, chained up, sitting on mattresses, and then the guards went out of the room, and so our blindfolds came off, and Brian and I found ourselves looking at Terry, Tom, and Frank. And it was wonderful to have real new companions after whatever it was, about 2 years at that point. And I remember distinctly that Terry sort of bounced across the cell towards us, right as far as the chain on his ankle allowed him to sort of greet us. And he was full of excitement, kind of a puppyish, almost puppyish welcome, which was delightful. And then we started swapping news. And at that point, we were thinking, one of us going home, maybe there was sort of news in the air. But there wasn't. And so we basically settled down that was how we were going to be. And Terry and Tom had been at that point held for 3 years, Brian and I for 2. And I remember we named that prison the Pit. That was what we called it. There were 5 of us in this underground room, staircase coming down from where the guards lived with metal gates on the way down. We were all chained up that evening. They got CCTVs, cameras watching us, and there was even a kind of toilet in the corner of this room. Not exactly your average sort of Hilton Marriott ensuite, but it served a purpose. And we were down there, I think, Brian and I think for 18 months, but with the Americans for about a year of that time. So it was an intense thing, and of course we were, as I said, we'd already been held 2 or 3 years, and we were exhausted and drained, depressed, and always sort of angry and just frustrated with this horrible situation, this mindless situation that we were in, having to wake up each day and summon the energy to keep going for each other, within ourselves, but also within the group. And we had very little to stimulate, very few books, occasionally allowed to watch, be shown a movie, etc., and very little actual hard news from the outside world. So we relied on each other for support and entertainment, talking, family stories, background, whatever. And in those first weeks, Terry, who clearly really ached and suffered through the lack of mental, intellectual stimulus, was sort of onto us, like sort of fresh meat, if you like, almost, that we were there, we were a new resource. And he couldn't help himself but ask questions and questions and questions and questions of Brian about Ireland and its history, the politics of the Troubles, about literature. Brian was a professor of literature in Beirut at that point. Or me, he would likewise demand, explanations of British history, the colonies, the empire, and politics, etc. And he seemed insatiable. I mean, many of you will know, his active brain kept on and kept on and kept on. But to be honest, under those circumstances, it was tiring. It was wearing. We were exhausted. He was. Sorry, his old AP colleagues are spluttering over here. I beg your pardon. But so it was quite difficult. And I remember on one occasion he was quizzing me about Britain's unwritten constitution, which I suppose to Terry, being a decent American, was is a terrible thing to have anyway. The fact it was unwritten and could be interpreted. And he was saying, so what does this work? How does this, John? And I couldn't answer a couple of questions. And then he suddenly got really angry and he sort of barked at me, "You don't know? You dumb or what?" And sort of that laughter is fine, but I remember sitting back thinking, Lou was very careful with his language, I will try to be, but I remember, oh, God, I was really actually wounded by that. I thought, come on, we're in here all together. You know, you're destroying me as an individual. I'm an intellectual lightweight. Thanks very much. Go bully the boy from Belfast and leave me alone. But it was interesting because Brian and I would have our whispered conversations. We were, 2 years together. We were very, very close, and really understood each other. Very different characters, different backgrounds, but we'd worked out how to live and support each other, and that was, absolute blessing for me to have Brian like that. But it took a while to develop that relationship, particularly, with Terry, and which ultimately became another very strong relationship. But I remember at that point, Brian said to me, "Look, you can't keep up with him," and I can't, frankly, said Brian. He's like soaking us, like drying out a sponge. He said, "But why don't you turn it around? Instead of him asking you all these questions, ask him some." So I did, and it was a brilliant idea. So I was quizzing him. You grew up in New York State. Tell me about your background. Where's Batavia? What's all the stuff? And what about a Marine? Why did you sign up to go and be a Marine in Vietnam and that war? What would, And then the journalism. And of course, I was a young journalist. I was nearly. I was 30, I think, just about at that point. This was my first foreign assignment. I was in Beirut a month and then got kidnapped, which wasn't much of an assignment in many respects. Anyway, but I was fascinated by Terry, and it was really interesting because when he was talking like that, he wasn't talking like hey, yeah, I'm a really cool dude. I've been a Marine. and I'm a Middle East chief correspondent. There was none of that. It was just a very honest man, fascinating stories. But there was a real gentle integrity about him. As I say, he wasn't bragging about any of this. It was just talking about his life and his experiences, and which often he hinted, even in those early days, at a much deeper personal vulnerability, which gradually he let us in to understand. And that was revealed especially when he talked about his family, talked about his brothers and sisters back in New York State, talked about Gabrielle and about Madeleine and Sulome, because you hadn't seen, she was born after he was kidnapped. And watching Terry do that and sometimes hearing messages or even maybe seeing a video occasionally of Sulome and just thinking about Gabrielle, how was she? The anguish that he was suffering was really large. And one was, we're sitting in this barren, bleak cells, chained up on these filthy mattresses. And when you knew Terry was really suffering, you could see it etched on his face, and he would just pull his blindfold down, probably to shield us from watching him cry, his tears. He wasn't ashamed, he was just so moved, and it was awful to see, to witness someone suffering like that. And obviously we all had similar sufferings, but it was very painful for Terry, particularly as he'd already been there a year longer than Brian and I. But it was interesting that, as I said, there was this vulnerability that came across, and Terry could be self-aware and take criticism, which was great. And he knew that sometimes he was too demanding and would try to control his desire for ever more information and ruthless debate, and he was good at that. I remember one point in this pit, we briefly had a radio, and Terry was amused to hear a commentator, probably some pompous Brit on the World Service, sounding a bit like me, I suspect, but I can't remember, reflecting that, and it was this, while Americans usually meant well, they would blunder about in their enthusiasm and loudly checked jackets, being gauche and naive. And Terry loved this, and as he relaxed over the coming years with Brian and me, and he would often mock himself if he thought he'd been a little heavy-handed in conversation, and he'd say, "Oh dear," they'd say, "there I go again, I'm being gauche and naive. G and N, always G and N." It was wonderful. And recognizing ourselves, our weaknesses, and hopefully our strengths, was of our own as individual, but also obviously of our fellow hostages, of the other guys, was an important part of our shared journey together. And of course, Terry's bullish, stubborn nature was a really vital part of our survival together. It was thanks to his nagging, for instance, that we had that radio on which he heard about GNN Americans. And thanks to his endless badgering of the guards that we would get more books and magazines occasionally. But it wasn't just about getting stuff to try and occupy us a bit, the books and stuff, to ease the frustration and boredom. It was about constantly reminding the men with the guns who chained us up, the men who hid behind the blindfolds that they made us wear, that we were human beings who deserved to be treated with respect. undercutting the threat of the guards through humour helped us all. You know, we loved, obviously, laughing at them, mimicking the way they spoke, the nonsensical rules they came up with, creating characters for them so that we could diminish, well, the brutality that they kept us in. And that was great, but we rarely got a chance to actually have a direct sort of laugh at them. But there was one time in the pit when Terry, sadly, had a very bad stomach upset, which, you know, we all suffered occasionally. But the guards let him off, took the chain off his ankle so he could use this little ensuite bathroom in the corner of the room as much as he needed, in the bathroom there. But at the end of the day, the guards' shift changed. And, you know, we always listened and we could hear the voice, and it was one of the really, I mean, not all the guards were bad men in regards to them, you know, over the years, but there were some who were right so-and-sos, if I can put it like that. And this guy who came on duty that evening was called Abu Salim, or that's what he called himself. And he loved his work. He really enjoyed it. So as soon as he came on, he came trotting down the staircase through the metal gates, and came and he went round all of us, checking our ankles. You know, he came to me, looked at my ankle, checked the Chambers Keenan's padlock, Sutherland, Reed, and came to Anderson, and there was no chain on because he was off. Why no chain, Terry? He said, I'm sick, I need the bathroom, your friends have... No. It must be chained. And you could just tell the delight in this guy's voice as he clicked it back on. And, you know, then he went away, and, you know, it was, I mean, Terry was in one of those just looking at the ground. Why this senseless, stupid humiliation? You know, we were underground. There were gunmen up on top of us. We weren't going anywhere, and they could watch us on camera anyway. Anyway, we got through it, you know, there was a bucket, Terry could use that, and we could, you know, whatever. So that practically wasn't massive, but it was just the sort of pointless humiliation of after all these years that was another drain. Terry got better, and a couple of weeks later he was fine, and this guard came back on duty, Abu Salim, and he came down, but he didn't came down to the cell as soon as he arrived. He didn't go around checking the chains on our ankles. He sat down beside me and he said, John, he said, how are you? And I said, yeah. All right, had better days probably. He said, but he said, John, I would like your help with something. And I'm thinking, probably the last person on the planet I would like to help in anyway. However, as I said, you know, it was a quiet day. I said, well, what do you want me to do, Abu Salim? And he said, I would like you to help me with my English vocabulary. 2 words immediately sprang to mind. But I thought, no, better not do that. I thought maybe we can have a joke. Anyway, I said, so all right, what have you got? And he said, I'm going to show you some things, and I will and you say them to me, you know, in nice English, and I can write them down, and then I can practice when I'm at home, so that I can build up. And I'm thinking, this guy in Islamic Jihad, I suppose at that point they were the most notorious terrorist group on the planet, and there they were coming to their hostages for vocab lessons. Anyway. So I said, all right, we can do that. And I thought, maybe I can, you know, take the mickey, or take the mickey? Does that, you know that phrase? Yeah, okay. Take a joke at you anyway. And anyway, so he said, right, you know. And then I'm secretly thinking, he's asking me because I've got the BBC World Service voice, you know. You know, he wouldn't go to the boy from Belfast, and as for the Americans, that would be... Anyway, so he wouldn't... Sorry, silly. Very silly, sorry. Anyway, so we started, and so I'm looking down, you know, beneath my blindfold, because obviously it's always hard to remember. The chains were a nightmare, but the blindfold, never seeing these people was extraordinary. You know, anyway, so we had the blindfolds down, and I looked beneath my blindfold, and guy says, you know, it's a cup, my plastic cup, and he says, so John, what is this? So I look down, and I say cup, and he repeats, cup. And I go, yes, cup. And then the cup disappears, and I look down, and there's his pen. What is this, John? And I say, that's cup. Cup? No, that's cup. And there's this pause. He's obviously confused, and I look down, and there's the cup and the pen side by side, and he's going, this is cup, and this is cup. And I'm saying, no, this is cup, and this is cup. So there's a long pause. He's obviously doesn't quite know, because I wasn't one of the, you know, I was normally a very docile, nice little hostage. So he must think, what's he doing? And then there's a pause, and then he's gone across the cell to Terry on the other wall, and suddenly I hear him say, you know, I'm blindfolded and I can't see what's going on, and wondering, has Terry any idea what's going on here? Anyway, and then I hear this Abu Salim say to Terry, what is this? And I hear Anderson's voice, that's cup. And there's a pause, and Terry, what is this? And then his sort of strangulated voice slightly as he's trying to choke back the laughter. Anderson says, "Oh, that's Cup." And there was a moment or two more, and then Abu Salim did fuck off. So we got. sorry, we did get that. We got there in the end. So I'm going on too long. Terry, anybody was supportive when one of us was down. He was great, offering advice and distraction of some sort. He knew we all had a responsibility to each other, but he took that very seriously. And particularly in the final year after Brian's release, when we were put together with fellow Briton Terry Waite, and Waite had suffered badly from asthma, and it was really difficult. And Terry was literally, Anderson rather, was literally, heroic. He would stay up all night with Terry Waite, trying to get him to calm down, help him. And we were exhausted, emotionally drained. And I don't think I would have been able to commit that much amount of time and support to Terry Waite, but Anderson did, because that's who he was. And spent the days shouting and badgering the guards, saying, "Get this guy some medicine, get an inhaler and whatever he needed." That was Terry. And in that final year, Terry and I became very close indeed. He taught me chess. And I was moved, really moved. So I loved the game, but I'd never played it before. But under Terry's guidance, I got involved and loved it. And it was really so nice for me, because he was patently delighted that I learned the game quickly, and within a few months was able to play almost at his level. And it wasn't like, "Oh God, I'm not going to give you any pieces anymore." He was so excited that I was learning it and enjoying this thing that meant a lot to him. That was wonderful. And when things got tricky with the guards, or indeed with our cellmates, he and I had an unspoken understanding, a bond about how we were feeling and how things were going. And one night, I'll end it here, but one night when everything was dark in that room with the four of us, chained up across the cell, me by the wall, then Terry Anderson, then Terry Waite, and Thomas Sutherland. And I was just nodding off about, just hoping to get to sleep. And suddenly there were a pair of hands around my neck as I lay back. I'm gasping. And then there's Anderson's face right up close, and he's whispering intently, "I'm sorry to have to do this, but I'm very frustrated. Someone has to die, and, as the others wouldn't understand, I've chosen you, John." And then we did what you can, we just fell about laughing, because it was totally bonkers, but he knew that I'd get that and find it as funny and whatever, but it was just a way of letting off tension and knowing that we were in there together. And it's funny, I will end now. There was the aftermath, and knowing Terry in freedom and getting our lives back together, and his life and so forth, which we could talk about. Maybe, I'm sure Madeleine, Sulome, and maybe Brian and Don will speak about that. But, I was just thinking that it was extraordinary that there we were in 1986 dreading meeting Terry Anderson, because he'd already been held for a year by Islamic Jihad. And then 5 years later, I'm released in 1991, and Terry is still being held. And he was held for a few more months, and was the last of all the Western hostages, I think, the last one to come out. He'd been there with and for all of us, and I salute a lovely man. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up is Brian Keenan, who is an Irish writer who is also held with my father. Thank you.
I always knew Anderson was going to get me in trouble, so here I am facing up to it. I forgot about the deaf and dumb thing across the cell. What Terry didn't teach us was, how do you deliver a punchline in the silence across the cell? So I'd be trying to tell a story, and trying to get out the punchline. Didn't seem, fuck's sake, Johnny doesn't even get the punchline. But anyway, so Terry could set up kind of difficult things. I don't want to talk too much about Terry inside, because John McCarthy stole my thunder, but I want to talk about a man that kind of I knew anyway. It was quite a surprise to me when I heard that Terry had passed on. Was something I wasn't expecting. And when I sat down to think about it and think, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to say about this? There's a picture hanging on the wall just outside my bedroom. It's a print by Paul Gauguin. And it depicts two men wrestling in a clearing in the wood. One of them is an angel. I've passed that painting many times, going to bed, coming. It fascinates me. I've tried to analyse it and interrogate it and get different answers from it all the time. It's a strange subject matter. A man wrestling with an angel in the woods. But because the painting came back to me when I was sitting thinking about Anderson, and I thought, well, you know, reflecting on the Terry that I came to know, and how that painting came back into my mind, you know, I think that maybe Terry Anderson was the man in that painting wrestling with an angel. Terry had a voracious intellect, a fierce curiosity, a kind of interrogation sense that came like a force 10 gale. And that's kind of got to be understood in terms of, you know, in a situation when you've been in a hole in the ground for years and years and years and nothing to look at but a concrete wall. And maybe you're tired of talking to people you've been with. So when new people are dropped into the cell with you, you talk incessantly. Terry did anyway. But that was a way of pushing back the wall. That was a way of opening up the landscape of your imprisonment. But with Terry, the talk was different. Terry went, what have I got here? Terry's kind of questions, he went into a kind of intense, deeply intense scrutiny, dissected, examined, stress tested, debated, prodded and poked at something for weeks and weeks until almost you had nothing left to tell him except, like, why don't you just fuck off? Terry was a journalist, you know, so what should one expect? But with Terry, it wasn't just an interview for a column in a newspaper. Talking to Terry was not easy. It was not easy. I swear by all that's holy. Terry talk was very difficult. It was exhausting. Maybe only angels would have the stamina for Terry Anderson as he tried to beat the information out of them. Over the years that I've known Terry, and it's been 35 plus years, you get to know a person very, 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 very well when you're with them 24 hours a day for a long time. And in all those years, I kind of always thought of Terry as being a man who was burdened by a kind of what I call iron in the soul, which maybe occasioned him to wrestle with angels. But angel wrestling isn't just 10 5-minute rounds. It's most of a lifetime. It leaves you pretty bruised, bloodied, broken in bits. But Terry carried his scars and his marks. He hid them. You didn't see them unless you knew them. But if he didn't want to talk about them, there's no point in trying. So Terry pulled a veil over his angel scars. The thing that I did find about Terry in all this inquisition was that he was looking for a sheltering place. And why wouldn't any one of us not look for a sheltering place in the place that we were in? Maybe he found a sheltering place. He'd done 2 terms in the Marines. Nobody in their right minds would have done 10 minutes, but Terry volunteered to do 2 terms. Maybe he found a sheltering place there. Terry, as I remember him from my experience in Beirut, took great solace in religion. Another kind of sheltering place, and I remember distinctly, and John spoke about it, but it came back to me when I was thinking about Terry. Terry was in a cell on his own next to where we were. John was asleep. And this little bastard of a guard called Abu, who sang the Al-Fatiha like he was an angel. And Terry was in his cell praying to his God. And it wasn't a prayer of the desperate prisoner. I listened to it, and it was a kind of a prayer that was a moving meditation of being in the presence of something very special. And I don't want to talk about it beyond that because it was to his God, whatever that was. And I was deeply and profoundly moved because he had found a sheltering place for however long that prayer would have lasted. It was like he had found this amazing moment of absolute peace, which I find difficult to understand, but that's my response to what I heard. In all the discussions I've had with Terry Anderson, and they have been many, you get the sense, certainly I did, of a man who wanted to make the world better. He wanted to fix everything, you know. Most of us would be just happy enough to fix a few things, but Terry wanted to fix everything. I think Terry wanted to find what I think of as a quality of goodness that makes life worthwhile. Now, goodness is a very weak word, but it's not in the sense that Terry searched after it. You know, goodness was not just a simple act of kindness. Goodness, in the way I think Terry understood it, was, can't read my own writing, was a kind of critical mass of new, profoundly new thinking and courage, you know. And maybe that's what he was trying to beat the hell out of the angel for, to understand this in a holistic way. Terry Anderson reminds me of Viktor Frankl's book, If This Be a Man, and where Frankl talks about his time in the concentration camps and his insistence, you know, when he came out and he wrote books about taking what was evil and the evil that happened to you and trying to find a force of good to transform it, to find something that was morally, spiritually, whatever, good. A strange journey for anybody to take. But Terry was like that, you know. The only problem with Terry was, and this was where the angel fighting came in, was Terry didn't think that he was good enough for what this thing that was bubbling inside him. And it wasn't just about self-doubt. But because of where we are, I'm over here. Let me just talk about some of this. I talk about goodness as critical mass. Terry Anderson carried the 2 Americans he was locked up with for years. Terry talked to me incessantly for years, because I'd been a teacher, about setting up a school. And he had it worked out in the most meticulous detail for troubled young men in the States. And I think Terry was talking about it out of his own childhood. I just have a sense of that. Terry taught students in university journalism, but He didn't teach them to write to a deadline. He told me about this. Terry wanted his students to write with purpose and conviction, to speak the truth to power, with authority and without fear. Now, if I had been one of his students, that's tough, but that's the way Terry found the responsibility of being, a journalist, because the word is powerful, and if you're going to use it like a scalpel, you have to use it purposely, with conviction, with power, with authority. Terry Anderson produced 2 daughters. Well, he didn't produce them on his own, quite obviously. Matt, I do apologise. But he talked about them a lot. Very special, very talented young women. And I've met them over the years. And his, the way he talked about them, they're better than that. And that's a good thing too. He's done, to my understanding, very great work with the Vets Association, raising money for school in Vietnam, raising money for homeless vets here in America. Now, these are all good things, and these are the critical mass that was Terry Anderson. But he had problems, angel wrestling problems. When he was released, he attended his church, and after some time found the church a disappointment. He found politics in America a disgrace. He found fatherhood a difficulty. Terry gained riches and lost them. But in all this, when you talk to Terry, there was a sense that Terry found himself somehow culpable for all this, but it wasn't. How could he be? But that was the sense, the kind of burden, the iron in the soul with Terry. I remembered that thing that John talked about. We were, I think it was down in Baalbek, and we were all in this room, 5 of us. And it was tough. And everybody was asleep, and I woke up, and Terry was banging his head off the wall, boom, 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 like a metronome, boom, boom. As almost as if he was trying to kind of, I don't know, wipe out, harden, demolish whatever was going on in his brain. And on another occasion, he was, and John talked about it, he was holding a picture of a newspaper cutting of Madeleine and Sulome. He always carried that with him. And he was very upset. And I didn't want to witness this, so I turned away. And the next morning, I didn't say anything to Terry about it. Terry didn't talk about it. I didn't want to say I'd seen it. It wasn't really my business unless he wanted to talk about it. But the thing about Terry was, Terry always wrestled his angels on his own. Terry wasn't very good sometimes at vulnerability. And the way you survive this thing is you accept other people's vulnerabilities and they accept yours. That's how you get through this. Terry found it very difficult. I remember on several occasions walking the streets of Dublin with Terry, and sometimes walking the streets of this city with him. And the impression I got was a sense of lostness, as if maybe he was still searching for that sheltering place, even though he embodied critical mass of goodness within himself. And I said to him, the way you say to somebody that you know very well, how are you really, Terry? And he answered, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Trip over yourself. fall down, get up, do it again, all over again. And, excuse me. And I thought, that was funny. But it was self-mocking in a way that told me a lot about Terry not wanting to talk about where he was, how he was feeling. And in other cases, I was writing this down, I remembered asking him about his ranch and his horse breeding. He had a big scar on his cheek here. And this cheek was different from this cheek. And I said, what happened to you? And he said, why, what's wrong? I said, what happened to you? Horse kicked me. Horse. I said, what? So whatever he was doing with the horse kicked him in the face, and he had to get plates or something in his cheek. And he had a scar from getting sewn up. And I said, phew. So like, that's pretty, so what are you going to do with these horses now? Like he said, well, I went in to talk to the horse, and we have an understanding. And I said, okay. Do you want to tell me about it? He said, yeah. I told the horse, you don't kick me, and I won't turn you into a tin of dog food. So, although Terry was ill for a long time, with lots of physical disabilities, and I think maybe psychologically exhausted too, because Terry demanded a lot of himself. This was his angel wrestling, and angel wrestling is not a good idea. Angels know all the moves. They have all the energy, but you have to be find resources in yourself when you go on this angel wrestling journey, which is about really going deep into yourself. You have to find resources that most of us aren't called on to find. And remember, as we all do, Terry found them somewhere because Terry's a survivor, and in his own way was very helpful to some other people surviving. I tried to think of some, because this evening is a memorial evening, of some memorial words for an angel wrestler. And this thing came into my head, and I thought, yes, now I'm going to tell this to Terry Anderson, and he's going to have to listen. He can't argue back. So it's payback time. And the words were written 100 years ago in this city. And I thought that's suitably memorial, I thought, by a Jewish poet. And when I read through them, I thought, yes, that's what I want to tell Terry. That's what I want Terry to know. So, as you go wherever you are, Terry, on the next phase of this journey, go quietly, amidst the noise and haste, and remember what peace there is in silence. Speak your truth quietly, clearly, listening to others, even they are ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid those who are vexatious to your spirit. And if you compare yourself to others, you may become bitter, for always there will be greater persons and lesser than yourself. Above all, see joy in your own achievements and in your own vision. However humble you might think that is, it's a real possession in these changing times. Be yourself. Do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for all disenchantment is as perennial as grass. Take kindly the counsel of others. Are you listening, Terry? Where were we? Nurture the strength of spirit to shield you in misfortune. Be gentle with yourself. You are, after all, a child of the universe, no more less than the stars and the trees. Whether or not it is clear to you, the universe is unfolding as it should. You don't need to wrestle any more frigging angels. Therefore, be at peace with God, whoever you conceive him to be. Keep this peace within your soul, for it still is a beautiful world. Now, I have two more things to say before I finish. And then the next thing is to you people who are friends and family of Terry. And you know that because a person isn't here doesn't mean they're not still with us. And I want to give this to everybody here who's a friend. It's short. A man lives for as long as we carry him inside us. For excuse me, for as long as we harvest his dreams, for as long as we ourselves may live, holding memories in common. So, a man will live. When I was coming over here on the airplane, I remembered this photograph, and Terry Anderson looks very well there. He wasn't long released. It's a picture of Terry at the helm of a boat. And I thought as I looked at it, well, Terry, you're now the master of your own destiny. You're the captain of your own soul. And in this onward journey in your soul boat, sit back. There's a crew of angels to do the work. You don't have to wrestle with them. So rest back. Take it easy. But here's the rub. Your navigator is the angel you've been wrestling with. But he knows where you're going. He knows how to get you there. And remember this always in your boat. Soul boats do not sink, you know. So, bon voyage. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next, I'd like to introduce Don Mell, who was present in the car when my father was kidnapped. And that was just the beginning of Dad's story with Don. They were great, great friends until he passed. So thank you.
Thank you. And Brian and John, I brought my cup. I'm the lucky guy that gets to speak after a Brit and an Irishman. And so I'm going to mangle the English language with in my gauche American accent. So I actually thought about writing a long speech about Terry, and I ended up only writing 5 words. And I'll get to them in a minute. And I hope I don't, that's good or bad, because I'm either going to be very brief or I'm going to ramble on like a certain president that lives down the road from my house in Delaware. And I just wanted to start with a few stories, a couple of stories that maybe people don't know, and I'll do this sort of in chronological order. I mean, my story, I think, has been told a million times, so I'm not going to tell that. But I'll tell a couple little bits of it. Because that morning, when he was kidnapped, I actually thought it was me they were after. And the reason for that is that he stopped where we were playing tennis. His house was halfway between my house and the tennis courts. And I actually had to get out of the car and I think go up and talk to Bill Foley about an assignment over the weekend. And I left him in the car for 3 or 4 minutes by himself. Came down and saw the car that eventually took him behind us. I mean, this is the second time. And when we got to my house, and this is where it all happened, I thought, okay. And since you guys have dropped a couple of F-bombs, I'm going to just be a little potty mouth. I said, holy shit, this is me. Well, it wasn't. And it took me 11 years to figure out why. And that's another little story. But, and that was in 1996 when he and I went back to Lebanon and sat down with Hassan Nasrallah, the General Secretary of Hezbollah. And this is something Terry wanted to do. And I was a little surprised, but not completely. And the fact that Nasrallah agreed was a little surprised, but not completely. And we had this sort of meandering conversation for 45 minutes, sort of like, and it was a cleansing in a way. And they never, we never really got to the point. They said, well, if we had done this, we're really sorry, but we didn't. And then, sort of a circuitous conversation. And I realized, one of the things that really I admired about Terry is that he was sitting there in a forgiving mode. And I'll get a little more to that in a minute. And I'm sort of sitting there, and finally at the end I said, all right, I want to get to the point here. How come him and not me too? And Nasrallah looked at me he speaks in a very soft voice, and he said, do you fish? I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And he says, well, if you fished, you wouldn't understand, you throw the little one back. So I thought, okay, thanks a lot. So, didn't make the cut, I guess. And I said, all right. And he said, but, there's another reason. He said, if you really want to give the American government a message, what better messenger than a journalist? Anyway, sort of fast forward. When Terry got out, I had my first conversation right after Lou with Terry. Mine was a little, same sort of language. He said, I got on the phone, he said, you fucker. Skated out of that one, didn't you? And I thought, all right, things are going to be okay. Or, they're going to be as okay as they can be. And, I remember, just again, the positive attitude that he had at that very moment. And I remember talking to those same guys for a day that you had sent to talk to Terry, and they actually said at the end of it that I was normal. And I said, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I really didn't think they knew how to do their jobs because we were all sort of crazy. But I will say this. I mean, I remember, and these are the the memories, the first memories I have of Terry is when I was like a 21-year-old kid. And he was a bureau chief of the AP, and the AP in those days in Beirut was like a collection of every single possible sect, religion. I mean, it was just this melting pot of people, and he kept us all together. But he took a chance on me. He took me under his wing, and I'm who I am today because of that. I mean, that's it. Later on, I think that Terry, he struggled with some things, but he and I didn't really delve into your experience that much. And the reason is, I think we just wanted to have we wanted to have the normal conversation and the normal life that we had before. And we did crazy things. I remember one story that he on his 50th birthday, we were down in New York, in Greenwich Village, and we were drinking like fish. And we were at our friends Carl and Sharon's house, and we got back to their kitchen. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. And Terry starts eating the cat food out of the cat bowl. She was on the counter, and I'm like, Terry, what the hell are you doing? That's cat food. And he said, I've had worse. And I said, I'm sure you have. But that was always, those were the kind of light moments that we had. And, we just went out and did crazy stuff. We didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell our wives either. And speaking of that, I mean, I think one of the things that's really important to me is the fact that, he was my best man and I was his best man. And I'm trying to keep it together looking at you guys. But it wasn't just one day. That was every day. So, look, I want to just leave you guys all of you, with 5 words. I wrote down these 5 words. Lou, you've already used one of them. But think about these words, because these words are so important. In today's world, I don't need to tell everybody this. But the 5 words that come to mind when I think of Terry, number 1 is courage. Number 2 is loyalty. Number 3 is honor. Number 4 is friendship. And number 5, a mentor. My wife threw in obstinate too, because he could be that. But again, these are to me the bedrocks of the bedrock of a real human being, and I mean a human being that cared about other people. And I remember the last couple of conversations we had one was about John Domenico Pico, who just recently passed away. And I remember Sulome and you, your dad. Terry was doing things when John Domenico was in a bad shape, trying to help him in a very quiet way with no publicity. And that's the way Terry did things. Even though he was like a stubborn guy and you knew he was in the room, that's how he handled things. And the last conversation we had was about this house this project he was working on to raise money for veterans. And that was, a month ago. So I'm going to leave everybody with 2 thoughts. And the first thought came from you, John and Brian. What amazes me and what should really move everybody in this room is listening to you guys talk. It's somewhat matter of fact, and I mean that, again, in the most loving way. There's no anger. Look at the anger in this world today over nothing. And you have these 2 giants in your dad, and I never sensed anger. I don't sense love, but not anger. And maybe a teeny-weeny bit of forgiveness. And I think that makes you incredibly great people. And I'll just leave everybody with this. I thought about this, and I was, the sadness I felt recently is I can't describe. But I think we're all here, we're very lucky people. Every one of us. And especially for those whose Terry's life has brought us together in a very, very special way. And that's something that's never going to be lost. And so personally, I am walking out of here with a tear and a smile. And I just want to say, Terry, behave. All right.
Thanks, Don. My mother, Madeleine Bassil, is going to come up and say a few words. Thank you.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming. Some of you were in Syria or in Lebanon. When he came home, you received him. And now you're here to say goodbye, which is really hard. I was going to say a few things about that I call our journey. We met, we fell in love. He is stubborn. It wasn't love at first sight, that's for sure. Some of you may know that. But it was persistence and courage. And then he was taken away for 7 years. The love that was built during a year and something kind of lasted all the time he was away. I had my girl during his absence. In really very short, I'd say it went from birth, he came home, more love, frustration, anger, togetherness, separation, and there's, of course, nothing can be told in 5 minutes, so it's 40 years. And then friendship. We actually built friendship after we were divorced, not before. It was very hard. I know more about captivity. We wrote a book together, but I know more about captivity and what really happened from Brian's book. And I think that's what brought us back together after our divorce. It was your book. It took me years before I could read it, and I read it, and that was very, very strong. John's book was strong, it was just different. There were so many men in there, each one wrote their own version of their experience. And Terry always said, and I have to admit, John, he said, Brian wrote the best book. Damn. Now when I read our book, I see he was a reporter. He reported his experience. He didn't really put anything from himself. And I knew then when I read Brian's book, I said, I cried and I cursed and I called him. He was in Florida teaching, and I went there and I said, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Because he never really came out with his feelings. Something Brian said now, that the veil, I called it masks. Terry had mask after mask after in life. I guess his brothers and sisters are here. There were masks, each experience that he went through. When I'm just going to say a little bit here about before he was taken, we would go up to apartment where we lived, and I would see those shady-looking people, shady faces. They were like, they're looking at us with anger, and I never really knew why, definitely. But I'd look at Terry and I'd say, no, we interviewed wives of hostages that were taken before. I used to work with ABC News. And I would say to him, listen, I'm going to speak in Arabic, and you just nod your head. Don't say anything. They may think you're Russian. And he would laugh and say, with this ugly? Am I so ugly? Like, and of course, they did take him. They tried to take him the day before, and he managed to get away. He told Robert Fisk that later on, that day, they tried to take me, and I drove fast, and I got away from them. And after he was taken, Fisk, he told him, don't tell Madeleine, just don't tell Madeleine. I wish he did, because I would have insisted, whatever, just get the hell out of here. I'm glad I'm not crying right now, but I would say to whoever go to places of danger, just follow your instinct. Don't fight it. Just follow your instinct, because this is the only weapon you have, journalists. You're going to go places that is dangerous. Just follow your instinct. And I know maybe none of you guys are going to go anywhere at this point of your life, but in dangerous places. I want to thank the people that really helped us when he came home. First of all, Lou. Thank you. My family, his at the time ex-wife, Mickey, Gabrielle's mom. AP took care of us, mothership. The friends that we developed through the years, the people he worked with, and I see your faces, and Shaz, Erlene, they were there in Lebanon. They were the people he worked with, and some of them did not like him because he was so... Yeah, some people did not like him, but they respected him. That's it, really. It's very hard for me to say goodbye. I found him sitting on his chair. He looked like sleeping. But he went peacefully. He just drifted. He just slept on the chair. And he wasn't fighting any more angels at that time. Thank you for being here for him.
Okay, my turn. I'd just like to thank a few people. First of all, the AP, which has been absolutely extraordinary, and also the Overseas Press Club and the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you so much for your help in organizing this. I also want to thank my sister Gabrielle, who did not want to speak tonight, but she's been an absolute rock for my family, and we love her. And also my dad's brother and sister, Jack and Judy, are here. Okay, so since I was a child, people have been telling me I'm a lot like my dad. Before he came home, my mother would say that when she'd find me absorbed in a book. And that would make me happy to know the father I had never met loved reading as much as I did. I added it to the list of things we would do together after he came home. In my child's imagination, my daddy would be sick after his long captivity by the bad men. I pictured myself pushing him around in an old-fashioned wheelchair with a blanket over his knees, feeding him soup, reading him my beloved books. After the long-awaited day finally arrived, he was released and the cameras retreated to allow our awkward new family some time alone together. And I suddenly found myself struggling to relate to this stranger father. He was remote, dismissive, and at times harsh in ways I had never before experienced. I am nothing like this man. I remember thinking to myself, this is nothing like how I thought we would be. Of course, my 7-year-old mind had no concept of complex, severe trauma and what it does to someone's ability to form emotional connections, especially with children. Then came my explosive, turbulent teenage years, during which all those repressed emotions and second generational trauma came spewing out of me in full adolescent rebellion. I can't believe you are my father, I once screamed at him during some fight over one of my countless episodes of acting out in some forbidden and likely illegal way. You couldn't possibly understand a single thing about me. Instead of yelling at me as he usually did, Dad's voice became soft and befuddled. I don't understand you, Sulome, he told me. It's like aliens abducted my kid and left you here instead. After many more years of insisting I was nothing like my father, and we had very little in common, you can imagine my surprise when at 27 I found myself working as a journalist in Lebanon. Not only that, I was talking to some of the same people my father did, covering modern iterations of some of the same conflicts he once covered. My time as a reporter marked the closest period of my relationship with Dad. We bonded over our love of the job. I would often call him for advice about stories, and I'd see him swell with pride when talking about me. After I published my book, Dad told me I was a better journalist than he had ever been. It was everything I had hoped for. Perhaps that's why, subconsciously, I started down that career path in the first place, knowing it would bring me closer to the father I had always struggled to find a connection with. However, as I would often tell Dad, today's media industry is completely different from the landscape my father worked in ways that took a severe toll on my peace of mind. My father was the kind of journalist who rear-ended an armored vehicle in a Mazda after chasing it down a street in a rage because the Israeli soldiers inside had confiscated Don's film. Brash, outspoken, compulsively addicted to poking bears, and with an absolute passion for exposing injustice. If there's anything my journalism career taught me, it's that I'm more like my father than I could have ever imagined. Unfortunately, it's not a recipe for a well-adjusted, peaceful, or safe existence, especially these days, and especially for a woman. In 2020, I had a very near miss that prompted me to completely walk away from journalism. My experience was so traumatic and so reminiscent of what happened to my father that it triggered an intense period of self-reflection and transformation of my life goals. I eventually decided to move to a farm, write a novel, grow my own food, raise animals, and start planning a family with my partner. I went through a profound reckoning with myself that involved a critical examination of my own mental health, today's media environment, my political views, and ultimately how much of my identity was actually me, and how much was simply a reflection of my father. Our relationship became more challenging at points over the past few years. We would often argue, especially about US politics. During one particularly heated exchange, I texted him, "Dad, I tried to be you for so many years. Honestly, it made me miserable, and it almost got me killed. I'm just trying to be myself now. And even though we disagree about a lot of things, it would make me really happy if you would try to get to know the real me." After a long silence, he texted me back, "I don't expect you to agree with me all the time, Sulome," he said. "I'm doing my best to get to know this version of you." In recent months, my father and I bonded over new things: science fiction books, wildlife, farming, nature, and our shared outrage at various injustices across the globe, which we almost always saw eye to eye on. I like to think that even if he didn't have a way to tell me, he understood what I'm trying to do by breaking the cycle of generational war trauma and choosing peace for myself and my future child, who I very much wish he could have met. As my mother was supposed to say and didn't, in his final days, Dad was planning to move with her to New Mexico, where I think we could have all been a family in a completely new way. I am heartbroken that we didn't get that chance. If my dad has a legacy, it would be the old journalistic adage of afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted. Anyone watching who wants to honor him, this is the way. Always remember that journalism is not an institution that can survive putting powerful corporate and political interests above human interest. Our society cannot afford to allow foxes to dictate the henhouse beat. If you are in a position of power over others in this industry, please support your reporters if their journalism upsets some corporate sponsor, high-powered executive, or even our own government. My father gave almost 7 years of his freedom because of his absolute dedication to telling the truth about Arab civilians dying in a far-off war. The best way anyone can pay homage to his life is to be unafraid to speak truth to power, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's unpopular, even if it's dangerous. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our surprise guest, Senator James Skoufis, who has honored my family by asking to speak tonight. Thank you.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. I typically don't do well, emotionally speaking, at memorials, but I'm humbled to be here and follow friends and family. I didn't personally know Terry well, met him several times. I represent Orange County, where he lived, including the town of Warwick. And I'd occasionally see him at political functions. He was on the local political committee in the town of Warwick. And my most recent, and the last time I saw him, was either the start of this year or very late last year. As has been referenced a couple times, he helped lead a local veterans organization called Rumshock that its mission was to build homes, tiny homes for homeless veterans in the Hudson Valley. And the meeting at that time in my office was to ask for my support for a federal grant, a congressional grant that they were pursuing for $1 million. And so I sent a letter and supported it with a call to our congressman. And years and years and years went into this effort to try and get legs underneath this organization and start building these homes. And I think a lot of lesser men and women would have given up along the way. They were hitting a lot of brick walls. I remember meeting with them when I was in the assembly 7+ years ago. And during that interim time, not a single home was built. And I'd say about maybe a month or so ago, there was a big celebration because they got $1 million grant from Congress, thanks to his application. And besides underscoring his contribution to our area in that regard, the reason why I bring this up is this organization had their annual dinner, their annual gala, about a week and a half ago, maybe a couple weeks ago. I went, and as you can imagine, the other leaders of this group were still heartbroken. It was just on the heels of Terry's passing. And they were all, as I'm speaking to them, holding back their tears, but to a person, they were all so glad that Terry was alive to see the fruits of his labor. And after so many years of trying relentlessly to get this organization off the ground, in just a short amount of time, thanks to his work, there are going to be now currently homeless veterans housed, thanks to his efforts. And so it's humbling to follow friends and family that knew him on a very personal level very well, hearing their heartfelt words and how much he meant to a lot of people in this room. I fashion myself, I like to think of myself as someone who, amidst some others, unfortunately, in my line of work, who don't respect the press, holds the Fourth Estate in great respect. I think that the media holds no greater responsibility than during times of societal stress and conflict and war. And certainly Terry paid a very deep, enormous price to keep his fellow man and woman informed. and report the news. It's probably about a couple years ago, one of my favorite podcasts is Against the Odds, it's called. And each season is about a different human experience that is unthinkably challenging. And so one season is about Ernest Shackleton and his survival out on Antarctica for years. One season was about an American humanitarian aid worker who was captured and held hostage by domestic terrorists in Somalia. And at the end of that, and she eventually escaped with the help of the military, so it was a happy ending. By the end of that season, that podcast, I couldn't help but think, well, what would I have done if I was in that situation? How would I have behaved and acted and maybe survived, maybe not survived if I was a hostage? And I'm from Queens, but I'm currently now an ex-urban, middle-class white guy, and I don't know how. I think one of two things would have happened. Either I would have withered away in the desert of Somalia after day 5, or I'm half Greek, I'm half Irish, spitting these guys' faces, and they chop my arms off, and then I wither in the desert and don't last more than a few days. And it's incredible to think how one could survive for 6.5 years as a hostage. It's unthinkable. Not just surviving, but everything that was missed, the sacrifice, the family moments, the moments with friends, certainly, an entire livelihood. But that was the sacrifice he made to keep society informed. And so, I'm here, and thank you, Sulome, for allowing me a few moments. It's really a privilege. I'm here because the New York State Senate, the highest award that we're able to bestow on citizens of New York, is called the Liberty Medal. And we, in politics, I've been doing this for 12 years now. I look pretty young. I was really young when I started. Now I have gray hair. We give out lots of certificates, we give out proclamations, we give out resolutions, and we can give out, one of our dirty secrets in this line of work is we can give out 1 million of these. There's no limits. If every ribbon cutting, if we want to print a certificate, we can do a certificate. We can get frame proclamations, and that is at our full discretion as legislators. The Liberty Medal is not. In my 6 years in the Senate, after getting here from the Assembly, I think in the 6 years maybe I've provided 3 Liberty Medals over that time. And there's an extremely high bar one has to meet in order to receive one of these medals. It has to go through, as I said, it's not at my discretion, it has to go through an entire vetting process. The Senate Majority Leader has to personally sign off on each and every one of these. I just, a couple of days ago, we were in Albany this week, just came down here from there today, and I brought up the Liberty Medal with some of my friends and colleagues in our members' parlor in between votes, and mentioned I was giving one of these out later this week. And some of my colleagues had given out 0 Liberty Medals. One, to underscore the high honor that this is. A few years ago, I put in a nomination for a firefighter in my district who ran into a burning building and literally saved a life. And the nomination was rejected. And the explanation was, and I couldn't believe it was rejected, the explanation was, well, firefighters are supposed to do that. That's part of their job. Seriously. So they didn't get a Liberty Medal. But when I put in this nomination, I said 2 things. One, because these normally take 4, 5, 6 months to review. I said, I need this reviewed in a week. They looked at me like I had 19 heads, but they did it. And 2, you guys better approve this because this one's a no-brainer. And they did. And so it's really my privilege to present to the family the Liberty Medal that has been bestowed to Terry posthumously for his deep for his deep contributions to the field of journalism, to society writ large, and also for inspiring his fellow man and woman in the process. And so if the family could come up, I'd like to present this to you.
Oh, yes. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. This has been a really, really beautiful, beautiful evening. Thanks.